the essence of the Labour remedy. Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora. I call the honourable member Shane Ardern.
Mr Speaker, what a pleasure it is to rise in support of the budget, and particularly after the previous speaker. Mr Speaker, I think what you were listening to there was a leadership speech, but the problem with that, Mr Speaker, was the only one listening were the members on this side of the House, because those on the other side of the House couldn't understand a single word that the Honourable Shane Jones was talking about, except for when he reverted back to the Labour type, which of course he struggles to agree with himself. Mr Speaker, what we are looking at is, as other members have said, is a very, very stark contrast. A contrast between growth, forward movement, a party that is focused on what makes the economy grow, what creates jobs, what will create a better future for New Zealand, and a group, a mismatch of people from the left, what the Prime Minister say, 51%, 49% shareholding between the Labour Green parties, and no one really knows which one has the 51% share. Mr Speaker, the issues confronting the country at the moment are how do we grow an economy in what has been described, not by me, but by political commentators and economists around the world, as an economic crisis, as an economic downturn on a scale equal to the 1930s depression. How do you grow an economy in that circumstance? And we listened to the opposition spokesman for finance, the Honourable David Parker, earlier on talk about Labour's track record in the management of the economy. Well, let's have a look at that for a moment. Let's test some of what Mr Parker said. Let's go back, as he did, to the 80s, when you had the David Lange, Roger Douglas administration. And just remember, at that time we had a Prime Minister that said the agricultural sector was a sunset industry. Now, when you think about that in the context of today, where 70-odd% of our export receipts come from that sector, it is a bizarre comment. It is a ridiculous comment. But what is so bizarre about it, even today, was that was the case then, when those comments were made. And what happened at the end of their tenure through the 80s, apart from the fact that they had 3 Prime Ministers in quick succession towards the end of it? We had the 1987 share market collapse. We had the bailout of the BNZ. We had interest rates that peaked at 22%. We had inflation rates that ran at 18%. I mean, this is the track record that Mr Parker is talking about. Let's just have a look at some of those figures. So then we had a change to the new incoming Bolger national government, who inherited this fiscal shambles. At the end of that period, Mr Speaker, the country was on a growth strategy again, with growth rates in the 4% growth rate. We had interest rates that were back down to the lowest level they'd been since the early part of the 60s again. We were on track for an economy that was growing. What happened then? Well, the government changed in the late 90s. And what did we end up? What did we end up with then? We ended up with the Clark-Cullen government, the next Labour government, once again checking this track record that Mr Parker spoke of. What happened at the end of that period? Well, we had interest rates back up to 10%. We had inflation growing at a rate that was unsustainable. We had the economic export receipts in decline again, once again in decline. And we had the best economic circumstances that the New Zealand economy had seen in about 5 generations. The best. And what did we end up with? We ended up with a circumstance that this government, the incoming key government, inherited, which was, once again, a fiscal outlook that had the government heading towards 60% debt by 2020. A forecast 60% debt against GDP by 2020, and no prospect of government surplus ever again. Well, that's the track record Mr Parker wants to promote. Then I invite him to promote that as strongly as he can over the next few months, because I think it's the best thing since sliced bread for the national government. So what have we got today? We've got the lowest interest rates in 40 years. The lowest interest rates in 40 years. What is it about it, our opponents, that they can't understand about that? For mum and dad Joe hardworker out there trying to own their first home, it's in the order of $300 to $400 a week compared to what it was with the Labor opposition in power. We've got the lowest inflation we've had for a very long time, with the cost of living going up by less than 1%, under 1%. Food prices for a very, very long time becoming more and more affordable for mum, dad, Joe hardworker out there. What is it about that Labor can't understand? Well, the member over there bays, where are the jobs? Well, the end result of all of this fiscal growth is more investment. And I heard the Honourable Shane Jones talking about unemployment rates. Look at Taranaki, the area that this member here would condemn, and his colleague often does. Where are the jobs? The highest employment rate in New Zealand, in Taranaki. Why is that? Because of a strong growing energy sector and a strong growing agricultural sector. Both sectors that our Labor Green opponents would attack and have said. Let's just talk about what they've said they will do. They'll introduce a capital gains tax. They'll introduce an emissions trading tax. They'll increase higher company tax. They'll increase higher personal tax. They'll do away with the 90-day trial period in employment, as the member keeps baying, where are the jobs? They'll do away with the 90-day trial period. They'll increase ACC charges. They will increase interest rates through higher government spending and more government borrowing. Those are the end results of a Labor administration over a period of time. So what's this government announced in its budget? It's in regard to jobs, and the member wants to know, $130 million boost for Kiwi R&D startups. Budget 2000 is investing $130 million in the Callaghan innovation, in encouraging business to invest more in research and development and support new startups. What the member obviously can't comprehend, and Labor never can, is this country is made up of small businesses that employ low numbers of people. So where would you invest money if you wanted to get more jobs? In great government expenditure? In great government employment schemes? I mean, this is the government, of course, the opposition, the Labor opposition, that invested so much in the public sector that they doubled the office space for bureaucrats in Wellington over the term of the Clark government. And what did that do for employment? What growth came out of that? What were the opportunities there? What would they do in terms of opportunities, in terms of development and the like of what I've just said in the energy sector? Well, they would reverse the RMA reforms that this government is proposing and has already carried out, and have said they were going to do that. So how would you develop an energy efficient economy under those circumstances? In fact, what did happen under the Labor government? We saw a massive increase in the use of fossil fuels for the generation of energy, because the sustainable energy production development could not take place because of the RMA or environmental constraints that were placed on those developments. So they talk about the growth in jobs, they talk about improving the economy. What they would do is devastating towards the economy. In the budget, $80 million for irrigation. Is there any lower hanging fruit than producing more of what we're good at and what we have international markets to sell than what this would produce? Right up the eastern belt of the whole of the South and North Island, including the Hawke's Bay, which the former Speaker spoke of, where we could invest in irrigation. And of course the cry from the Greens on this is more dairy cows. Well, when we put water into the Marlborough area, it wasn't dairy cows that developed there, it was actually vineyards. And if you go into Marlborough now and suggest, and the Labor Party, the Greens are potentially mad enough to say that we should never have done it, and there shouldn't be vineyards in Marlborough, where there used to be one sheep per 10 hectares in some of that very arid land, there are now intensive, world-renowned viticultural developments that are exporting $1.2 billion to the world and still have potential to grow. Mr. Speaker, what we have in this budget, the Bill English budget, the John Key-led government budget, is a strategy for strong growth going forward, a formula for success, a formula for jobs, and I strongly support the budget, Mr. Speaker.
I call the honourable member Dr. David Clark.
Mr. Speaker, kia ora.
Talofa lava.
Talofa lava. Well, Mr. Speaker.